Under the blazing sun at Arlington National Cemetery, a lone sentinel marched in perfect rhythm. 21 steps, pause, turn, 21 steps back. Tourists stood in reverent silence, some wiping away tears, others watching in awe. The tomb of the unknown soldier, sacred ground where silence speaks louder than words. Among the crowd stood a man who didn't quite belong. Judge Robert Callahan, federal judge from Washington, D.C., gray-haired, clean-cut, tailored suit gleaming even in the heat. He wasn't here for a tour. He wasn't even here for peace. He was looking for something he couldn't explain. Welcome to Chronicle Hub. If stories like this fascinate you, stories of honor, mystery, and moments where truth collides with tradition, make sure to hit that subscribe button and become part of our growing community. There's a lot more to come. Callahan's gaze swept across the white marble rows. He admired the precision of the guard, the discipline, the silence. He saw in that silent ritual a reflection of the order he demanded in his courtroom. But then, something caught his eye, a faint glint, a shimmer of silver. He adjusted his glasses. A cross, a small silver cross just barely visible beneath the collar of the sentinel's uniform. His expression hardened. This wasn't just a uniform violation. It was, in his eyes, a betrayal of neutrality. This tomb stood for every soldier, regardless of faith. Symbols didn't belong here. At least, not religious ones.
Callahan pushed through the crowd. People turned to look. Cameras paused mid-click. The judge stopped directly in front of the sentinel, motionless, rifle at his shoulder, eyes locked on a point only he could see. The sentinel didn't blink, didn't flinch, didn't speak. "That cross," Callahan said, his voice sharp enough to cut the silence. "It's a violation of military uniform code. Take it off, soldier." Still, the guard didn't move, not a flicker. Once again, if you haven't subscribed to Chronicle Hub yet, now's the time. We bring you real, gripping stories that don't just entertain, they make you think. Callahan's voice rose slightly, just enough to make a few more heads turn. "I'm Judge Robert Callahan. I've ruled on cases involving the separation of church and state. That symbol is inappropriate and likely illegal." An older woman nearby, Ellen Carter, a military widow, stepped forward gently. "Sir, they're not allowed to speak while on duty." But Callahan didn't budge. "I'm well aware of protocol," he snapped, waving her off. "But this is an open display of personal belief while wearing a government-issued uniform. That's not protocol. That's defiance." And right then, in front of dozens of stunned visitors, Callahan pulled out a business card and scribbled something on the back. A court summons. "You are hereby ordered to appear before the U.S. District Court tomorrow morning at 10. Failure to comply will result in a warrant for your arrest." He tucked the card into the guard's uniform and turned sharply, walking away as if he'd just passed judgment on the world itself. People murmured, some angry, some confused, some just silent. But the sentinel, Corporal Daniel Harper, stood still, silent, and yet inside his mind was racing. Because Daniel Harper wasn't just a soldier, he was a lawyer, a graduate of Georgetown Law, a former JAG officer. And the cross he wore? It wasn't some casual accessory. It had belonged to his grandfather, killed on Omaha Beach in World War II, who died wearing that very cross. Harper had gone through all the proper channels. He'd secured formal approval through the Department of Defense to wear it while on duty. A small symbol, a deep meaning, and every inch of it completely legal.
Subscribe to Chronicle Hub if you want to know what happens next, because this story is just getting started. That evening, back in his barracks, Harper sat alone, methodically reviewing his defense. His military bearing never slipped, but the weight of the moment pressed hard. He contacted his commanding officer, Colonel Sarah Mitchell, making sure all documentation was in order.
DoD Directive 1300.17. He knew it by heart. A service member may wear small religious items if they do not interfere with duty. His approval letter was signed, sealed, and on file, legally airtight. Meanwhile, George Callahan sat in his high-rise study, surrounded by towering stacks of law books, legal journals, and glowing screens. He'd already convinced himself he was right. This wasn't about religion, he told himself. It was about principle, neutrality, uniformity. He cited the Church of Lukumi Babaluaye v. City of Hialeah. He cited Department of the Army pamphlet 6701. His argument was clear. Religious neutrality is essential in public service. That cross, no matter how small, threatened the symbolism of the tomb itself. He saw it as a violation, a crack in the wall of separation, a danger to the sanctity of the uniform. But something still gnawed at him, a tiny voice from the past, his mother's voice, her cross clasped in trembling hands as she battled cancer. She'd said faith would save her. It didn't. She died anyway. And since then, Callahan had never looked back, never prayed, never forgave, never forgot. If this story speaks to something inside you, don't forget to subscribe. This is Chronicle Hub, and we're just scratching the surface. The next morning, the courthouse buzzed. Reporters lined the marble steps. Inside, Courtroom 5 was packed. Lawyers, clerks, veterans, tourists who had been at the tomb just yesterday. Ellen Carter was there too, front row, her hands clenched around an old photograph of her late husband in uniform. At 9:59 a.m., Corporal Harper walked in, dressed in full Tomb Guard uniform, rifle, gloves, boots gleaming. Heads turned, phones buzzed. He walked straight to the clerk. Corporal Daniel Harper, here for the hearing before Judge Callahan. "Are you representing yourself?" the clerk asked, stunned. "Yes, ma'am," Harper replied. Word spread fast. By the time Callahan entered, black robe flowing, the room was already holding its breath. He looked out at the packed gallery, then at Harper, alone, no attorney. "Corporal Harper," Callahan said, his voice steady, "you've chosen to appear without legal representation. Given the nature of these charges, I advise you to reconsider." Harper didn't flinch. "I will represent myself, Your Honor."
Callahan nodded. Very well. Let the record show the defendant has declined counsel. He outlined the accusations in detail. Unauthorized religious symbol, modification of ceremonial uniform, disrespecting a national tradition. He referenced case law, precedent, regulation. His tone was sharp, almost surgical. And then came the warning. Fines, disciplinary action, possible removal from tomb duty. All of it looming. And then Harper stepped forward, calm, focused, unshaken. "Your Honor," he began, "before we address the charges, I must make a correction. I stand before you not just as Corporal Daniel Harper. I am Captain Daniel Harper, licensed attorney, former Judge Advocate General, graduate of Georgetown University." The gallery gasped. Callahan blinked, caught off guard. But Harper wasn't done. "And I have come prepared to defend not just my honor, but the law itself." The room fell silent. Callahan's eyes narrowed. The air tightened. The battle lines were drawn. Callahan leaned back in his chair, lips pressed into a thin line, trying to process what he'd just heard. A tomb guard, a lawyer, a captain. The pieces didn't fit the way he had imagined. The courtroom, still stunned from Harper's declaration, now sat in absolute silence. The judge motioned for him to continue. Harper lifted a sheet of paper from his brief, his voice unwavering. "Your Honor, this is a certified copy of my religious accommodation request approved by my commanding officer, Colonel Sarah Mitchell, in accordance with Department of Defense Directive 1300.17. The cross I wear is not only authorized, it's protected. It does not interfere with my duties as a sentinel. It is minimal, concealed beneath the uniform, and has personal significance connected to my grandfather, who was killed at Omaha Beach wearing the same cross." He paused, letting the weight of his words hang in the air. "This is not an act of defiance. It is a permitted act of remembrance." Callahan reached for the document, scanning it quickly. He looked up, but said nothing. Harper continued. "Second, Your Honor, I dispute the charge of disrespecting the traditions of the tomb of the unknown soldier. The tomb honors sacrifice. It honors all who have served regardless of belief. My grandfather served. He died, and he believed. The cross represents not just faith, but blood, legacy, sacrifice. The idea that honoring him somehow disrespects others, frankly, that offends the very diversity the military stands for."
The veterans in the gallery shifted, a few nodding subtly. Ellen Carter's eyes glistened with pride. Harper's tone sharpened slightly. "Third, and most critically, I must address this court's jurisdiction. Uniform compliance is governed by the Uniform Code of Military Justice. Civil courts do not preside over internal military matters without express authorization. This summons," Harper held up the judge's handwritten card, "is not a valid legal instrument. It does not follow the federal rules of civil procedure. I am here not out of obligation, but out of respect for this institution and the rule of law." He stepped back. "Given these facts, I respectfully request all charges be dismissed on both procedural and substantive grounds." Before Callahan could speak, the doors at the rear of the courtroom opened. A tall woman in a full military dress uniform strode in. Rows of medals gleamed on her chest. She walked with the authority of someone used to making hard decisions. "Your Honor," she said clearly, "Colonel Sarah Mitchell, Commanding Officer, 3rd Infantry Regiment. May I approach?" Callahan nodded, unsure of what else to do. She stepped forward, standing beside Harper. "Everything Captain Harper just said is accurate. His religious accommodation was submitted, reviewed, and approved through all proper channels. The cross is legal, unobtrusive, and does not interfere with his duties. I have here the complete file, including internal memos, photographs, and prior case studies of other religious accommodations: Sikh turbans, Muslim prayer beads, and Jewish skullcaps. The military respects diversity in faith as long as duty is not compromised." She placed the folder on the judge's bench. "Also, Your Honor, this case falls entirely under military jurisdiction. Captain Harper is an active duty officer under my command. Civilian courts have no authority to discipline or remove him from post. That responsibility lies solely with me." Callahan's hands tensed against the edge of the bench. His jaw clenched. For a man used to control, this moment was slipping through his fingers. Harper spoke again. "Your Honor, as a soldier, I followed the chain of command. As a lawyer, I followed the law. And as a grandson, I followed my heart. This courtroom is a temple of justice, but even temples must admit when they've erred." The gallery was completely still, every eye locked on the judge.
Callahan looked down at the file. He saw the signatures, the dates, the regulations he hadn't considered, the precedent he hadn't researched, the soldier he hadn't understood. For a moment, he said nothing. Then, finally, he cleared his throat. "This court acknowledges that it overstepped its authority," he said slowly, carefully. "The charges brought against Captain Harper are hereby dismissed. Captain Harper's conduct is in full compliance with military regulations. His accommodation is lawful, and his service is exemplary." He raised the gavel and brought it down with a quiet thud. "Court is adjourned." But Harper didn't move. "Your Honor," he said one last time, "I would like a formal statement for the record. Yesterday I was accused publicly, in front of witnesses, of violating my oath. I request that this court acknowledge not just dismissal of charges, but the legitimacy of my conduct, for the sake of the uniform I wear and the tomb I guard." Callahan's face was stone, but his eyes flickered, maybe with guilt, maybe with recognition. Slowly, he nodded. "Let the record show that this court erred in judgment. Captain Harper's actions were fully within legal and military bounds. This court offers a formal apology for any distress caused by its assumptions and a recognition of the integrity with which Captain Harper serves." The moment hung in the air. Then the gallery erupted. Veterans rose to their feet. Ellen Carter clapped with tears in her eyes. The courtroom, once a place of confrontation, had become a place of clarity. Outside, the media waited. The story was already trending online. Debates flared up about religion, the military, the role of symbols in public life. But Harper didn't stay to give interviews. He walked down the courthouse steps, his posture straight, his eyes calm. As he reached the bottom, Ellen Carter caught his hand. "You did your grandfather proud, son." Harper smiled quietly.
Meanwhile, back in his chambers, Callahan sat alone. He reached into a drawer and pulled out an old silver cross, his mother's, the same one she'd clutched while she faded away. For the first time in years, he held it without bitterness. And for the first time in years, he wondered if he'd misjudged more than just a soldier. This is what stories are for, to remind us that behind every symbol, there's a human story. Behind every uniform, a legacy. Captain Harper showed us that tradition and diversity don't need to be enemies. They can walk side by side. Thank you for watching Chronicle Hub. If you found this story powerful, don't forget to subscribe. Share your thoughts in the comments. What would you have done if you were Judge Callahan? When have you judged too quickly and been proven wrong? Let us know. And join us next time for another story that reveals the truth hidden beneath the surface.